Welcome to the Permission to Heal podcast. I am Marcy Brockman. Together we will discover what brings us healing, meaning, and true joy. You only need your own permission to begin. Hello, and welcome to Permission to Heal. I am Marcy Brockman, and I am really thrilled that you're here. Today's guest, Adam Baruh, and I have so much in common, and we just met for this episode. He's from California, and we have so much in common. If you had to narrow down the top 3 things that Adam Baruh loves most in the world, it would have to be travel, family, and a nice bottle of Chianti. He loves everything about travel. He loves landing in a new city, not knowing any of the language, and trying to figure out how to get on the train. He loves walking around open markets in new places he's never been to, and has traveled by himself and with others. Just being in new places is a thrill for him. And while he has lived in some remote tropical places where nature dominates over people, his favorite places are old sleepy towns in Europe, filled with cobblestone streets and narrow alleys and laundry hung to dry on lines over the streets. He enjoys taking time to sip his cafe latte while watching the energy of the world moving around him. With over 16 years of hands-on management in NetSuite experience, Adam is the CEO of SuiteCentric, a NetSuite consulting company. He's a creative, well-rounded technical leader with a unique blend of engineering, functional, and architectural perspectives and expertise. And his solid foundation in NetSuite experience was initially built on 5 years of engineering suite cloud automations, custom portals and applications, and a whole lot of technical integrations and migrations that are beyond my scope of understanding. And he is a thoughtful and determined problem solver and has a vision of humanity and vulnerable empathy and personal growth that is really beyond the old 20-year, 30-year-old understanding of what a CEO and founder of a tech company is. We had a delightful conversation, a really open-hearted conversation about childhood trauma and panic attacks and intergenerational trauma and destigmatizing what we hope is destigmatizing the mental health conversation. I mean, that's what Permission to Heal is all about, right? Talking about what ignites us and helps us along our own personal healing journeys. And while the details of each of our stories is different, the underpinnings of humanity and our shared feelings and emotions are the same. And Adam has 4 kids, and he lives in San Diego with his wife, and he gets to the gym, and he used to be an international wedding photographer, and he's the CEO and founder of a couple of companies and is working on yet another one. He's also the host of a podcast called The Change that amplifies the voice of servant leaders working to normalize the mental health conversation and build more empathy into business. I'm going to be a guest on his podcast in the coming months, and I'm really thrilled to have him as a guest on Permission to Heal. I hope you find the humanity that resonates in his story, and I hope that it can connect to your own. Thank you very much for being here week after week and sharing the episodes with your friends and family, and really helping this PTH podcasting community to grow. This is one of the most meaningful experiences that I have ever had in my life, hosting this podcast. And it moves me beyond words that it is resonating so well with all of you. So continue to share, continue to subscribe, continue to like and follow, and give us good reviews if you like the episodes. And thank you so much for being here. Hello, and welcome to Permission to Heal. I am Marcy Brockman, and I am really thrilled that you're here. Today's guest, Adam Baruh, and I have so much in common, and we just met for this episode. He's from California, and we have so much in common. If you had to narrow down the top 3 things that Adam Baruh loves most in the world, it would have to be travel, family, and a nice bottle of Chianti. He loves everything about travel. He loves landing in a new city, not knowing any of the language, and trying to figure out how to get on the train. He loves walking around open markets in new places he's never been to, and has traveled by himself and with others. Just being in new places is a thrill for him. And while he has lived in some remote tropical places where nature dominates over people, his favorite places are old sleepy towns in Europe, filled with cobblestone streets and narrow alleys and laundry hung to dry on lines over the streets. He enjoys taking time to sip his cafe latte while watching the energy of the world moving around him. With over 16 years of hands-on management in NetSuite experience, Adam is the CEO of SuiteCentric, a NetSuite consulting company. He's a creative, well-rounded technical leader with a unique blend of engineering, functional, and architectural perspectives and expertise, and his solid foundation in NetSuite experience was initially built on 5 years of engineering Suite cloud automations, custom portals and applications, and a whole lot of technical integrations and migrations that are beyond my scope of understanding. And he is a thoughtful and determined problem solver and has a vision of humanity and vulnerable empathy and personal growth that is really beyond the old 20-year, 30-year-old understanding of what a CEO and founder of a tech company is. We had a delightful conversation, a really open-hearted conversation about childhood trauma and panic attacks and intergenerational trauma and destigmatizing what we hope is destigmatizing the mental health conversation. I mean, that's what Permission to Heal is all about, right? Talking about what ignites us and helps us along our own personal healing journeys. And while the details of each of our stories is different, the underpinnings of humanity and our shared feelings and emotions are the same. And Adam has 4 kids, and he lives in San Diego with his wife, and he gets to the gym, and he used to be an international wedding photographer, and he's the CEO and founder of a couple of companies and is working on yet another one. He's also the host of a podcast called The Change that amplifies the voice of servant leaders working to normalize the mental health conversation and build more empathy into business. I'm going to be a guest on his podcast in the coming months, and I'm really thrilled to have him as a guest on Permission to Heal. I hope you find the humanity that resonates in his story, and I hope that it can connect to your own. Thank you very much for being here week after week and sharing the episodes with your friends and family, and really helping this PTH podcasting community to grow. This is one of the most meaningful experiences that I have ever had in my life, hosting this podcast. And it moves me beyond words that it is resonating so well with all of you. So continue to share, continue to subscribe, continue to like and follow, and give us good reviews if you like the episodes. And thank you so much for being here. Adam. How you doing this evening?
Hey Marcy, I'm doing okay. I'm not 100%, but I'm good enough to record this because I didn't want to miss this opportunity to meet you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't think anybody could be in the mid of their lives in 2022 and always be perfect.
Yeah,
There's always something.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and you might as well. I mean, first of all, I hate canceling meetings because
Yeah.
I just don't like. I know that you carved out time to to be here today, and just my schedule is bonkers, and so it's just problematic to reschedule these things anyway. So I'm good
Yeah.
enough to go. So yeah, happy to be here today.
Excellent. Excellent. So, you've got a podcast called The Change,
Hmm.
and you have a very, as you said, very busy schedule doing all sorts of things. And we were talking before we started recording about how our missions seem to be somewhat aligned. And I would like to talk about that. So, maybe you want to introduce yourself? Like, who is Adam Baruh and how have you come to do the things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite the journey. There's been a lot of self-discovery, and I'm going to thank the pandemic for that. I think the pandemic was a catalyst for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a podcast yesterday, and I actually used the word I'm kind of grateful for the pandemic because of this journey that I've had. Obviously, I wouldn't wish any of the sickness and disease and
No,
job
of
loss
course
and
not.
all that stuff, but um, I do feel like I'm not alone in this. That there's a lot of people that the pandemic really just kind of flushed stuff out,
Yeah.
and
It helped
for
us
me,
prioritize what we wanted to do and clear the decks of the things that we didn't want to do, I think.
that's one part of it, and I think the other part of it is I really look at it as a global shared traumatic experience. I mean,
Absolutely.
what it flushed out in me was not conscious at all. There was just a manifestation of a series of events, and fortunately, I was trusting my higher self, and I found really just a well of healing for myself that I didn't even know I was capable of. So I guess I'll go back now and give you kind of the story behind that.
Sure. Cool.
So yeah, just background on me. I'm the CEO of a company called SuiteCentric. We are a NetSuite solution provider. NetSuite is an online ERP system that companies can run their order management, inventory, CRM, payroll, all this.
What does ERP mean?
I think it stands for Enterprise Resource Planning.
Okay.
And so think of like one kind of central database that your warehouse team like can be tasked with what they need to do, your customer support team, your salespeople, your operations, like your finance team, like everybody is in there able to do their specific job. It's one central database. And so um I've been doing it for 17 years. I kind of like the development aspects of it, which is kind of where, my career has been focused is in the software development side of working with NetSuite. But
Okay.
I've done a number of different things. So let me kind of take you back. I was married before, and I was living in Seattle, and this is where I got my start in this NetSuite world.
Well, Seattle
And
seems to be one of the tech hubs of the country.
oh yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed the company I worked for. They actually had a fantastic company culture, really great, friends and team members that, I still don't communicate with all the time, but we still kind of cross paths and stuff like that. Um, but I wasn't really happy in my marriage. There was something in me that felt that I wasn't called to do what I was doing. I didn't connect with I didn't connect with the projects that I was working on. I just didn't have that relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
I was miserable. And my ex-wife and I decided to move to San Diego where I live today. And part of that probably was, escapism and trying to, understanding that our relationship wasn't where we wanted it to be and perhaps an attempt to, start anew. But, it wasn't long before really the writing was on the wall. We divorced, I think it was like 2009 or 10 or something like that. And what happened was, 2009, 2010, if you recall, this is like when we had the Great Recession, right?
Sure.
So I was doing, my NetSuite job, but I was seeing that my hours were, impacted. I was having a hard time making money because I was paid hourly. So I had a friend who was getting married. I had expressed zero interest in photography. I did not own a good camera. I mean, I was interested in it, but I never
Sure.
really saw myself doing it as a career. I personally don't think I'm all that artistic. Okay. I'm like, I don't even have a good stick figure. Okay. I'm that
Okay.
bad when it comes to graphical art. But in any regard,
I'm interested to see how this links up now.
yeah, so in any regard, my friend asked me, "Hey, do you want to do this? Like shoot our wedding? We don't really have a budget."
So you
Like,
were the wedding photographer.
yes.
Okay.
But I wasn't doing it at all. I mean, my friend just
It
reached
was
out,
just
"Hey,
out of the blue.
yeah, we don't have a budget to hire a photographer. Would you mind?" I mean, they did an elopement wedding too, so there wasn't really too many people there. I'm like, sure. And I wanted to do a great job for him. So I had like 6 months. So I actually bought a nice camera and just researched and studied and practiced and tried to get better and did their wedding. And it was a lot of fun. I and the editing process was really fun. I was pretty happy with the results. And so because
Was
I
it
wasn't getting a
digital
lot
or
of,
film?
it was digital. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
there's not a lot of people that are doing film. My wife
no.
has a degree. My current wife has a degree in photography, and so she studied film. I wouldn't even know what to do in a dark room. But
Photography was my minor as an undergrad. And I worked for a wedding photographer as an assistant for a while, and we did so many weddings. And I
yeah,
shot a few as a principal photographer. I was hired, kind of like you were. Somebody said, we're getting married. We don't have much of a budget. How about $100 in the cost of film and dinner? Will you shoot our wedding? And
yeah.
I did, a little, small handful, half a dozen of those kind of weddings. And those were film. I had to,
Hmm.
that was fucking pressure because it's not like
Yeah,
digital
you
where I
don't
could take a
really.
thousand shots. I was using film. It was scary.
Kind of a little segue here, but like when I went to a workshop and the instructor kind of emphasized the importance of shooting in manual mode. That was
Mm,
so scary to me because I was like
yeah.
an aperture priority. I just didn't trust my ability to kind of like read a scene and understand the lighting and set
F
the exposure and
stops
all
and
that.
yeah.
But I mean, that was the best advice, some of the best advice I got in photography. But anyway, so I kind of, because my income was, fluctuating with the market at that time. So I decided to just test the waters and see, if there was something there. And I did the thing that a lot of photographers kind of don't like, but hey, you got to get your start somewhere. I advertised myself for like $500. I'll shoot your wedding. I'll be there all day. I'll give you everything, all the digital negatives, everything. Um, and
Good
even when
deal.
I started, I was editing every single picture, like 2,000 pictures, which I then learned later on about culling, but
Yeah.
separate story. But um, so, I had a very successful first year of doing this. And so for about 2 years, I was doing both NetSuite and wedding photography. I mean, my weekends were taken up, a lot of nights, obviously working during the day doing software development. And basically decided after a couple of years to go full time with it. That was a lot of fun. I met my current wife, and she had studied photography, like I mentioned, and had just moved from Cape Cod out here to San Diego. And so we, just started shooting together and then ended up building a business together and
That's fun.
traveling the world. I mean, we actually got married. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary is on Monday.
Congratulations.
You mentioned Italy earlier. We got married in Italy, in Eastern Tuscany. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, so we ended up kind of the one of the greatest. The last two weddings that I photographed were phenomenal because we got to what I did after our wedding. I wrote a whole blog article on our website about how to get married in Italy as an American citizen, all the paperwork, offices you need to go to, yada yada. And I mean, that went viral, that post. I mean, daily I was getting people reaching out, asking questions. And I was always trying to convince somebody like, hey, listen, we'll shoot your wedding for free. All you got to do is pay our expenses to get out there, which literally, like, compared to what we were charging for San Diego, it was like equal. So
Cool.
we finally got somebody to bite off on that. And I spoke decent Italian at the time. It's terrible now, but so the promise was, hey, I'll take you to all the offices. I'll make sure that you got all the paperwork signed by the people and then we'll shoot your wedding. And so my wife, now
So
this was
you're an
about,
American expatriate Italian wedding um coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to have the opportunity to travel. It was kind of like our brand was built around being travel photographers.
That's awesome.
And so the second to last wedding that we photographed before we called it quits was at the same castle where we got married. And this was maybe a year and a half, 2 years after our wedding. So my wife was actually pregnant with our now 7 month old. So it was really special to be able to go back there, see the people that helped us and worked with us, for our wedding. But anyway, this is a total segue. But
It's fun. It's part of the circuitous and the beauty of life, you know?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of learning here. But I will tell you that, and I'm not putting the blame on just wedding photography in general. I had a different circumstance where I had child support and I had just a lot more expenses than your average photographer. So I ended up going into bankruptcy really because I was, we just weren't making enough money. It's just, people, I've had, numerous times at a wedding where people were like, you must make so much money. No,
No,
nope. But I really enjoyed that art. And surprisingly, I was actually good. Like I found my artistic talent, right?
that's awesome.
So, but actually in the lead up to our wedding, we went out to Italy. We had already booked this villa and estate and, met with the couple that owned the estate and they really helped us out. But we were in Bologna one night and we were in this hotel. We kind of went last minute to Bologna and there was some event going on in town. We couldn't find a hotel. I had to literally book the only room available, which was like $1,000 a night. It was ridiculous. I didn't even have the money for that. And I
Yikes.
didn't sleep at all that night. I was just like, I can't keep doing this. I love it, but financially it's kind of not working out for me, right?
Right.
That was a really tough thing. When you absolutely love something, it feeds your soul, it's creative, it's getting you connected on an emotional and empathetic level with my clients. I mean, I just loved that part of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it work financially. um
Tough decision.
that bankruptcy unfortunately is still an artifact in my life today. I'm coming up on my 10 years now where it'll be wiped just in a couple of months. But
You should have a
the
party.
long story short, I decided to go back that night in Bologna. I decided to go back to doing NetSuite
Okay.
and leave photography. And okay, so I'm gonna now fast forward to this journey that I had kind of around the pandemic. So I had kind of a bunch of different NetSuite roles, but in January of 2017, I founded SuiteCentric. Now, because my background was in software development and I had a lot of experience in wedding photography and my college degree is in environmental studies. So I actually worked for the National Park Service for a period of time, which I absolutely loved. Um,
This is
I was,
this is why I like you so much. And we just met during this interview because what I can tell already is that you're a seeker and that
yeah,
you're curious about things and that you're
way
not
curious.
afraid to try new things just to feel what it feels like, just to experience it. I
So
love that.
my first two episodes of The Change focus on kind of getting out of your comfort zone, emotional courage,
Hmm.
that layer of vulnerability, and kind of putting yourself out there and doing something completely scary. I mean, I went through all that. And so anyway, kind of, now with SuiteCentric and, we had a great first couple of years, but something that I was very much dealing with was imposter syndrome,
Sure.
which, I'm sure your audience knows what that is, but it's like, kind of fronting. I've heard that word too, fronting, or imposterism, where, what you're doing isn't necessarily aligning with, you know, what you feel like you're called to do, right?
Or
And
you feel like why should someone listen to you and why you? Like why would you
yeah, I felt
be
like
the
a fake.
trusted person with expertise in this particular field, you know?
I totally felt like a fake.
Yeah.
And a lot of that now, and I'm going to lead into this journey that I had, but looking back, really a lot of that imposter syndrome and that fake feeling was the result of some really profound negative self-talk that has been
Hmm.
pervasive my entire life that I can remember. Um, so fast forward now, I think this was around 2019 going into 2020. And I mean, looking back, I can kind of see, what was precipitating a lot of this. There was some legal stuff I was dealing with SuiteCentric, and but I started having really profound anxiety attacks. I had never had one except for one time, which makes sense, but I had never had one my entire life. I'd never really had claustrophobia. The
Can be
one
very
panic attack I
scary.
had was right after 9/11, like literally the day they resumed flights. I had to go to New York and work there for 2.5 weeks. And just, I worked in this law office on 6th Avenue, and we're staring right down out of this window to the smoldering towers, and just two and a
Jeez.
half weeks walking around
Yeah.
Manhattan. It was somber. It was the
Scary
trauma.
shit.
I mean,
I'm a New
there was
Yorker. I
no
get
way
it.
to not, yeah, there was no way to not absorb that trauma.
Yeah.
I get on the plane to fly home. I was living in Santa Barbara at that time. And I used to always love the window seat. So I'm in my window seat, and then this lady gets in the middle seat. And I think it was her mother sits in the aisle seat, an elderly lady who had a broken leg and a straight leg cast. And there was something that happened in my mind where I was like, oh my God, I'm not gonna be able to get out of the seat for 6 hours. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, get me off this effing plane. Like this is,
Right.
I literally almost pressed the call signal to tell the stewardess, like, I'm not gonna be able to take this flight. What I did was I put my face right to the window, and I
Mm-hmm.
imagined I was outside, and that was fine. As soon as we took off, I was good to go.
Okay.
Um, but now here we are, 2019. I'm having more frequent, um, like claustrophobic panic attacks. I now kind of that I'm talking about with this with you, a lot of that I think had to do with I had my fourth kid who, my younger two kids were from IVF.
Okay.
Um, and the process of IVF was really, really difficult. I mean, I
Yeah.
won't get into it, but obviously more difficult for my wife, but still very stressful
Sure.
for me.
Of
It's
course.
funny, like
The
I talk to
hormone
people now
injections
that are
alone make everyone crazy. Yeah.
I talk to people now that are pregnant, and they're telling me about their ultrasound, and I have absolute fear of ultrasounds. I'm like, every time we had an ultrasound, they were like, oh, like nothing, fortunately, ended up being any sort of an issue. But anyway, um, so now, my kid was born in October of 2019. So this must have been, yeah, now early 2020, now that I'm kind of doing the timeline where I started to get these anxiety attacks. My little guy, who's almost 3 now, he actually at 2 months old had some, what we now know was a bladder infection, which was the result of some issue with his ureters, and I forget the name of the condition, but
My
uh,
daughter had the same thing.
so we had to rush him to the ER. Thank God my older two kids were actually staying with me um this particular night, because we had at 3 in the morning, whatever, rush um my kid out to the ER. And so my older kids watched my 7-year-old daughter, who's now 7. Um, they didn't know what was wrong. So they did a spinal tap. They did all this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
and then we had to, and once they diagnosed what his issue was, then we had to have him on antibiotics for a year. Fortunately, he grew out of this, and then, we're all good. His nervous system is still impacted by that.
My daughter, I've never heard of another parent who had a kid that had this. My daughter had the exact same thing. She was 9 months old. She had a high fever every single day for like 6 or 7 days. We were back in the pediatrician's office every single day doing urinary. They were trying to do a urine analysis, and
Yeah.
to get a 7 month old to pee on command,
Right.
it's impossible. And it wound up being that she had a bladder infection, a urinary tract infection, and one of her ureters, one of the valves that connect the
Exactly.
ureter to
The exact
the
same condition.
kidney was wasn't formed. So all the backflow of the urine
Mhm.
when the bladder got full, and so they were afraid that with the bladder infection that the infected urine would go back up and damage the kidney, and then there were all sorts of horrible things that could happen.
It's
Uh,
exactly it. It's
so she
exactly the
was
same
on
condition.
antibiotics, a low prophylactic dose of antibiotics for a year. And we had this nuclear scan that she had to do that
VCUG.
yeah, that proved that the valve was not there. And then a year later, we did it again, and her body had grown the valve.
Yeah, and that's the same deal with my kid.
I've never heard of another person who had this.
He had
Wow.
he had a grade 4 severity, which they were like, he's probably going to need surgery by age 5. It's no big deal. It's kind of, we'll get this corrected. There's not going to be a long term, but obviously they were very concerned about the kidneys. But fortunately, a year later, so we did one VCUG, which is absolutely terrible. He's like a little, can't remember when we did it, but maybe like 6 months old. He had to be strapped to a table, laying down with this big ultrasound machine above
Yes.
him, with a catheter up him, and they're flushing fluid while they're looking to see that, yep, sure enough, it's back loading up into the kidneys. So now magically, when we did the following VCUG a year later, he didn't have that condition anymore. But the
It's amazing,
artifact
right?
now is
The
he's
body
speech
is
delayed.
amazing.
He's almost 3 years old. I've seen progress in the last 2 months that I'm super happy about, but very speech delayed kid. And I attribute that. I even said to my wife when we were having to force this syringe in his mouth to shoot the antibiotic, and then I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if this kid's got some sort of oral issue, because it's not pleasant for him when we have to do this, right? But,
Wow.
so he's getting up. I don't know if this was related to his condition, but, of my 4 kids, I think they all, looking back, they all kind of slept really well, except this little guy. He's getting up like 5, 6, 7 times a night.
Oh, poor
Now,
guy.
I was working about 70 to 80 hours a week. And
Adam,
then
that's not healthy.
no, so when the pandemic hit, I've got 25 people on my payroll. So, I took a significant amount of responsibility as a CEO and business leader to avoid at all costs having to lay anybody off. I didn't want to have
Sure.
to do that. We were a very company culture, team first, and we still are. Um, and so I basically made it my mission to do everything I could possibly do to ensure the financial success of my business. So hence me working 70, 80 hours a week. Because this project I was on, we had a vendor in India that we were collaborating with, and he was online between like 9, Pacific time, about 9 p.m. till about midnight. Every night I'm working with him. So I'm working all
Right.
day, then getting off and doing the whole family thing, getting the kids to bed, back on the computer till about 1 in the morning. I told my wife, I'm like, look, I will, as much as I can, since I'm already up, take Ezra when he wakes up and get him back to sleep. Um, and so I was sleeping, in addition to how much I was working, I was sleeping about 3 hours a night. And that
Ugh.
was disjointed. That wasn't even like one
Yeah.
session. So that's when I really attribute that to now the compounded anxiety attacks that I was suffering, to the extent where I couldn't, every time I would go to bed, panic attack. I'd be screaming for my wife to help me. Thank
Oh,
God being next to her was like a source of like,
comfort.
that resettled me.
Yeah.
But I remember going to a client meeting. This client called me for a meeting up in LA, a couple hours north of here. And I had been to their office before. I had been in this particular conference room before. It was probably one of the largest conference rooms I've ever been. You could fit 150, 200 people in this conference room.
Wow.
But it was like an interior conference room. And I was meeting with this guy just one-on-one. So we're in this no window conference room. And I had to excuse myself several times because I'm having panic attacks. I didn't tell him what
Because
was
the
going
room
on.
was so big
Yeah.
and you were enclosed.
And I really suffered. I mean, my mental health was not good. I just was not in a good
Well, the
place.
sleep deprivation alone, if you
Yeah,
had nothing else, just the sleep
I
deprivation
couldn't see how
alone.
I was going to get out of this. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is like, I kind of was starting to lose hope. I was like, is this just how it is now? Like, how's this going to culminate? I decided I had to get off this project. It was burning me out, and just, my nervous system couldn't take it anymore. Hired a bunch of really awesome but very expensive developers and kind of set them up, and handed the project over. And at the same time, I was like, I actually have to do something. I can't trust, if I just go back to the status quo, that I'll heal.
Mm-hmm.
And, in my role as a CEO on LinkedIn, especially, I mean, I get solicited from people trying to sell me stuff every day. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had almost every day people advertising to me as an executive coach, business coach. And so, one day I show up to work and this Kristen Taylor executive coach advertisement came up in my LinkedIn notifications. I was like, huh, and I checked out her profile. I'm like, she seems kind of cool. Like, I like that she talks about some spiritual stuff, and I'll give it a shot. Reached out to her. We started talking about, it took a couple weeks to get, a meeting lined up, but so I started meeting with her on Fridays. We had the first session where I just kind of explained everything. And then our second session, which was the next Friday, I remember having a conversation with her where, my older kids, not my daughter, who's my oldest, who's now 23, but my son, who's now 20, he, I could tell from like just getting divorced with his mom, like he was impacted by that. And I,
Of course.
carried a lot of guilt. It's still, I'm like just tearing up, just like, cause I love this kid.
Of course.
um, and so I was, hello.
Hi,
I
we're
was having
here.
a conversation with
You okay?
Kristen on this second session. I'm like, I harbor a lot of guilt over, this, kind of situation after the divorce. And she said, well, let's explore that a little bit. Like, do you think you feel guilt or do you think you feel shame? And I'm like, I, Kristen, can you help me with understanding the difference there? I don't really know. And I'm going to paraphrase her and I may botch it, but something to the effect that she said, like, shame is something that identities and belief systems are built on.
Mm-hmm.
Guilt is something that you feel terrible about, but it's not identity invoking, right?
Right.
You don't kind of build this belief system out of that. And so, we wrapped up our session. I was like, okay, went about my day, went home, did the whole thing with the family, got the kids to bed. My wife went to bed. Fridays was usually when I would kind of binge some shows. And so about midnight, I kind of wrapped up the show I was watching. I turned the TV off. It's super quiet in the house. And right after I turned off the TV, that conversation from earlier in the day, like came back into my mind. I'm like, guilt, shame. Like, do I feel shame for anything in my life? And it was like literally as soon as I even put that idea out there, looking back now, I mean, it felt like the parting of the sea or like being hit by a Mack truck.
Wow.
I liken it now because I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. I liken it now to my higher self
Uh-huh.
saying, he's ready. And
Wow.
so I was like, oh my God. When I was 6 years old, my parents had recently gotten divorced. And my mom had this babysitter, this teenage boy, come over to babysit us when she would go out. As soon as my mom would leave, he would lock me in my mom's walk-in closet, barricade the door, shut the light off, pitch black dark. And I mean, even now, like when I look back, I can feel that panic and that trauma that I had, just
Wow. Adam,
the
that's
terror.
awful.
But it gets worse, unfortunately, is
And your mom never knew? You never
well,
told?
I'll get there. But so when he would lock me in the closet, he'd invite his buddies over and they'd party and they'd be doing all sorts of pretty hardcore drugs. I mean, I remember finally when they would let me out, seeing people passed out with needles and rubber hoses around their arms. I mean, something that I knew as a 6-year-old was very bad. I didn't necessarily know exactly what they were doing, but most likely
Sure.
heroin, I would think. I don't really know. But the worst part of it was I was molested. I was
Oh,
molested.
no.
And that was the thing where the shame came from.
Of
And
course.
I never blacked out that memory. I mean, my whole life I knew that it happened. I think my parents knew. For sure. But this is like the late 1970s. So I just don't think nobody did anything or knew what to do. It was
Right.
just hush hushed. And so I had built this belief system now that that was all my fault, that I was bad, that I caused it,
Of
which isn't, I
course.
know for a fact isn't the case. I
Of
mean,
course not.
as a
Absolutely
6-year old,
not.
that wasn't a world that I knew anything about.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of, and I'm no, psychological expert, but I kind of, the way that I look at it is I think my psyche kind of created a story that it was my fault to give me agency over what happened. And so I was at
So you
least kind of
weren't
in
helpless.
control of
Right.
it. Um, but so here I am on this Friday night when like literally the revelation of my life unfolded in a matter of seconds and everything, all the dots in my life connected. Drug use that I had, alcoholism that was involved in, just bad behavior that led to my, divorce from my ex-wife, and just, even up to that day, just the ways that I would behave and be reactive. And, I had a very fragile ego. And I was like, well, there it is. It's all connected to that. It's
Absolutely
all
is.
connected to that.
So, what was your first step toward healing when you had that revelation?
I sat with it for a couple of days, and I mean, I felt the the most connected and just true and free that feeling that I've ever had in my life.
Can you tell us what that felt like?
Everything made sense. It was freeing. I was liberated. I knew why the panic attacks were setting in. I mean, the claustrophobia clearly from being
In the closet,
locked in that
sure.
closet. You know, I had never talked with anybody about what happened other than perhaps my parents, which I honestly, I don't even have any memory of talking to them about it. But um, I know my dad knows about it because like when you know I kind of started talking to him just in the last year about this, he was like, you know, that mother effer like, you know, kid. And um
Well, in
but
the in the late 70s or the 70s and the 80s, I was a kid. I was born in 68, so I was a kid in the 70s. They didn't talk about anything.
no,
There was all sorts of
none of that
shit
stuff.
going down, and it was just like, yeah, maybe you'd get an acknowledgement that what was going on wasn't so good, but no one talked about it, no one thought about it. It was just sort of like swept in the corner and
Yeah.
ignored.
You know, I mean, there's a number of facts. I'm not going to blame my parents either. I mean, obviously nobody, just society didn't talk about it, but
Sure.
you know, my parents also, they got divorced when I was 6. So like I don't think they were just in a place to, you know, really
No,
kind
they
of
were
deal
dealing
with
with
it.
their own shit. Yeah.
They were dealing with their own shit. I mean, my mom, you know, and God bless her, but she struggled financially to support us. And so anyway, but I had never told my current wife that this happened. I never, even to this day, my ex-wife doesn't know unless she has come across some of these podcasts that I've been where I've spoken about it. But
Or your kids told
what,
her.
so what well, my kids never knew. I never told it. I mean, I literally never told anybody because I thought there was no relevance to it. I hadn't ever made the connection up until that night how that event shaped my life. So I decided the following Friday in my next session with Kristen, I told Kristen everything. And she was, you know, like, oh my
Jaw
God,
dropping. Yeah.
what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to open up and tell people now. I want to, you know, I can't just hide this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I talked about, you know, how I wanted to tell my wife. And, you know, we kind of strategized the best way to do that. I wanted to tell my kids because I wanted to break the legacy. I wanted to break the legacy of not talking about this stuff and
Absolutely.
trying to be stoic because I think it's important,
Stoic is
especially
bullshit.
with young kids today, to know that you don't need to be perfect. And all of us are dealing with, you know, stuff one way or the other. We all are dealing with stuff, which is why I have more hope today for our future as a society than I've ever had. I think these kids nowadays, the Gen Z and even, I mean, millennials, you know, they kind of started this concept
Mm-hmm.
of focusing on well-being first, mental
Yeah.
health, well-being. And, you know, these younger generations are calling it out. I mean, the great resignation,
Yeah.
a number of things behind that. But I think, you know, a lot of that is just this desire to live a more healthy, a mentally healthy life. So, you know, now you look at the popular culture. I mean, you've got shows like Ted Lasso and
Oh
athletes,
my God, do I love Ted
actors. I mean,
Lasso?
people are talking about this stuff, which makes me like so happy to be living in this time that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah. My son is 24, be 25 in March, scarily enough. And I see him and his friends, like he's an engineer and is very science oriented, but his girlfriend and all of their friends, their work is very important to them, but it doesn't define who they are. They hike and they play frisbee golf and they go to concerts and they go to baseball games and they go camping and they cook and they bake bread and like they're living their life and they don't define themselves by the job that pays the bills.
Yeah.
And I think that I was reading an article in the New Yorker, I think recently about that as well. I think that that is really heading us in the right direction. This
Yeah.
whole
Somebody asked me right, like, yeah,
puritanical thing about,
yeah,
work ethic shit. That sucks.
it's gone. And somebody asked me yesterday, I was on their podcast and they said, is this temporary? Are we just kind of, this is the time now, but eventually things are going to go back. And in my, like the way that I look at it, there's no chance for that. Like
No, we're not
this
going
younger
backward.
generation is not going to stand for that. And so I'm so grateful to them and I applaud them. And,
Yes.
I try to do whatever I can to support them. So, one thing I'll say to kind of wrap this up and just kind of share with you is, it fundamentally changed what I decided that I want to do for my life. Right. So I mentioned earlier, I had dealt with this imposter syndrome, right? Trying to
Mm-hmm.
think I had to be somebody else. Well, another thing that, being in the tech consulting industry for the majority of my career, it's very aggressive. There's a significant amount of competition. There's a lot of showmanship, whatever that word is.
You got it right.
Yeah. So, I've always had this very heightened level of sensitivity, not a highly sensitive person, but I've always been very empathetic and very sensitive. And I thought that was a weakness. And I thought that was a character flaw my entire life until now. Now, the reality of the universe and who I was really was calling all that belief system that I had into question, where nope, that's my absolute superpower. My level of
Absolutely is.
empathy is my superpower, and that's my calling, and that's what I'm here to do. So, I think it's forever going to be a work in progress, but I decided to really change the way that I run SuiteCentric and just, represent myself as a leader, which is, I want to be this empathetic leader. I want to demonstrate for other business leaders that we can run our companies and still make all this money, but not do it in a way where we're killing our team, because the consulting industry is just ripe for burnout. In
Mm-hmm.
my career as a Gen Xer in this old school methodology of business management, I mean, I can't tell you how many weekends, nights, holidays that I
Yeah.
had to give up, because I had to work.
Sure.
Um, and so, some things that I'm doing with that. I mean, I kind of came out immediately and started doing, we would have this Monday company meeting. And it was prior to this revelation, would be like, all right, what are you working like around the team? What are you working on? What are you blocked on? Can we help you with anything? But now I said, I'm not doing that anymore. I think people are bored by that anyway. We have one-on-ones, we can cover that stuff, or smaller team meetings. So I started using those Monday meetings now. I shortened it from like an hour to a half an hour. Where like, let's do some guided meditation. I'm going to teach you
Awesome.
guys some breathing techniques. I'm going to talk about the importance of anxiety and burnout and how to not kill yourself. I'm going to make sure everybody on our team knows that we do not, from our management perspective, expect anybody to work more than 40 hours in a week. And I don't
Awesome.
want you working nights or weekends. If you want to do that, your call. I get some people, they just like the work. Um, we have like an
I
escalation.
saw the eye roll there.
We have an escalation, strategy now, because people, like, my team is getting hammered on the weekend from clients if stuff's not going, if something's down or whatever. So now we have a process to kind of deal with that. Um, but yeah, I mean, my whole kind of philosophy now is I'm really just trying to be this, empathetic leader, and just hopefully there's more and more leaders that see what, not just me, but so many people are doing now, so we can change the way that business is run.
So, in my mind, you can liken a leader of a company such as yours to the leader of a family or the leader of a small community group, or, like leaders just don't have to be work oriented. As a teacher, I feel like I'm a leader of each of the classes that I have. So,
Mm-hmm.
what advice or strategies do you think you would give another leader who's looking to embark on um, more open-hearted, person-centered, uh, heartfelt leadership?
Your CEO, I mean, it has to buy in to the importance, and not just buy in, but really explore within themselves, maybe some belief systems that they've thought were true, and that's just the way things are done. Because a belief system is a belief system. It's one person's belief system. It's not everybody's belief system, right?
Right.
So I think CEOs should kind of start with exploring, their own life experiences and how they can utilize those to help, people on their team. And that means being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
That means, you know, using mindfulness and really exploring self-awareness. Um, But, certain like things that I think companies can do, or, instead of the performance review, like the one-on-one check-in, where instead of saying, how you doing today? It's like, hey, I know, things are tight right now. Gas is 7.30 a gallon here in San Diego. Like,
Wow.
scale of 1 to 10, how are you getting by?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully elicit a little bit more of like, a meaningful response to
Mm-hmm.
that person, because I think those connections are really, that's where it's at. I mean, that's, running a team, that's what I thrive off of, is those connections that I make. And I understand that my role now as a CEO is to be an enabler and helper for my team, and to ensure
Mm-hmm.
that, I give them the tools so that they can succeed and meet their own personal and professional goals.
Yeah, we're all more than our productivity.
Yeah.
That our worth and our value is goes a lot further than the things that we can produce in a day.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, look, I deal with this stuff even today. It's something that I balance with, because yeah, I got to run my company. So, I work in the professional services world, where the main metric is billable utilization, right? Because that's,
Right.
we bill by the hour. So there's still, I kind of still need to get that done so that I can stay in business. But, I try to be very sensitive, like, where I'm not like, like I'm happy with somebody reaching 75, 80%, right? I mean, that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like billing 32, 35 hours out of your 40. And if that's where they get to, great. It starts to get where, if it's less than that, where, now it's more of an expense than, you know,
Sure.
having a level of profitability. But obviously we need that to come in. So this is where the self-awareness comes in,
Mm-hmm.
because, just having the self-awareness, like, okay, well, what's the best way to balance that, that metric, and, at the same time, not killing our people.
Long term, I think, I mean, in the short term or the long term, I think that what you're doing is building a, a company in which your employees are human first and workers second.
It's
I think
exactly
that
it.
you're building morale and a joy around being part of something larger than themselves, so that they don't feel like, like working for the man kind of thing,
Yeah,
like they feel like they're working towards something, and at the same time they know that they're respected on a human level and encouraged to have a life outside of work, like
absolutely. They're not just a number, but
exactly. And I know that 20 years ago that wasn't the case.
mhm.
Before, I've been teaching for 28 years ish, but I, like you, had a very circuitous kind of career path. And in the early 90s, I'd say like 90, 91, 92, I was working for a PR firm in Manhattan. And it was, we were cogs, we were numbers.
Yeah,
It didn't freaking matter if anything around us in our personal lives was going on. I mean, the woman in the cubicle next to me got fired because her son had strep throat 3 times that winter, and she had to take off work to take care of her kid. Her job was still getting
outrageous.
done, but she
Yeah,
got fired. Meanwhile, I mean, I was the assistant to the CFO of the company, and probably helping him write press releases and do all the things that PR companies do. His Upper East Side wife with the long red nails in the early 90s was would drop off their 5-year-old daughter for me to babysit at work so that she could
wow.
go have her tennis lesson with her tennis pro. And I'm like, so you're paying me my salary, telling me that my job is important enough for me not to have a personal life, but then I'm supposed to just push that aside to babysit your 5-year-old in our office? And you're
Yeah,
firing the woman who's next to me because she can't take care of her kid when he has strep throat. I couldn't stand the hypocrisy of this. And
it's out of control. Like,
it was
so
insane. I had to quit. I'm like, either I'm going to go postal, and I mean, I let spiders out of the house because I don't even want to kill spiders. But I was thinking these evil thoughts. I want to push this
yeah,
man in front of a train. This evil asshole. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah, I
So
think we live in a world where, I mean, that sort of behavior is like, I'm not like, I have
no,
my boundaries and I'm going to respect them, you know?
I left. I couldn't do it.
So when I created, this other company beyond SuiteCentric. Now I created this company called EIQ Media, which is responsible for hosting my podcast, The Change. And I also convinced my coach, Kristen Taylor, who I mentioned, to host her podcast, which I produce through EIQ Media, right?
Okay.
The reason I'm bringing this up is on the I think it was episode 3 of The Change. I interviewed this lady, Michelle Dickinson, who had a really challenging upbringing. Her mom had bipolar, and she just dealt with a bunch of stuff, throughout her life, and found herself working at this job where Michelle was getting divorced, and her boss knew that,
Mm-hmm.
and it was time for the performance review, and her boss gave her really terrible, like, remarks and scores. Michelle said, I always scored super high on these reviews. She's like, Michelle, I downgraded you because you're not your bubbly self these
You're
days. I mean, can you
kidding.
imagine?
No. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, so this is why I'm doing what I'm doing and trying to get the word out through my podcast and through
Yes.
how I made it through, which is Kristen's podcast, that you know what? Let's I mean, the focus of The Change kind of shifted here over time a little bit. It was originally kind of focused on the Great Resignation and exploring that. But now I kind of tightened the scope where I'm interviewing servant leaders that are working to normalize the mental health conversation and increase empathy in business. So that's, I make no money doing what we're doing. I don't have any advertising just yet, but
No,
it's a
I make no
passion
money on my
project.
I lose
Yeah.
money on my podcast every month.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's an expense for me, but it's worth it. It's a very expensive expense too, but it's worth it for me because I want to make a difference, and
Hmm.
hopefully, well, I know there's a lot of people out there that are resonating with this message.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, your podcast runs weekly,
We're doing The Change
right?
is bi-weekly.
Oh,
We publish
bi-weekly.
on Tuesdays. We just had I believe it was our 24th episode. I'm actually coming up on my 1 year anniversary since my first
Congratulations.
episode. Kristen, with How I Made It Through, which she's about to go into season 2, which she's going to shift her scope a little bit, talking about people that have had near-death experiences or spiritually transformative experiences,
Nice.
and kind of how those experiences kind of shaped their lives. Hence, How I Made It Through, right?
Oh, I have a
Um,
story for her.
Oh, I would love to get you connected.
I
Season
have a
one was
story for her.
fantastic. I mean, we were able to connect with some really kind of, well-known people and athletes and, people that are on television and stuff like that, it's all vulnerability. It's people
Yeah.
sharing these really difficult, vulnerable experiences, but, just the power of being vulnerable and sharing a story. I mean, this is why I'm
That's where
so
empathy begins.
interested in what
That's
you're doing, because
yeah.
it's along the same lines. I think it's so important that we in a society get to a place where it's all good. It's all good to talk about what you're going through, because we shouldn't be hiding it anymore.
No, and if they're universal, when I was writing my memoir, I was publishing my memoir. I was saying, look, this is my story. The events that happened in this are my life, but they're universal experiences at the same time.
100%.
The details might change, but the feelings and the humanity underneath it, the
Yep.
trauma, the vulnerability, the pain, the anguish, even the celebrating and the joy are universal things. This is why, 600 years hence, Shakespearean plays are still read, because it's
Hmm.
the human experience. That's what we
Exactly.
need. Human beings are story making beings. That's how we ingest knowledge. It's how we acquire and make sense out of our experience, is through the telling and sharing of stories. And we have to get back to that and not let corporate uh, bottom lines and political divisiveness get in the way of our shared humanity and cut us off
Yeah.
from each other.
And I really think that that's not going to go away. I have so much hope now for the
Yes,
future, and
we won't let it.
I think it's amazing to be here living in this time that we do.
Yes, me as well. Me as well. Okay, so I end each interview with the 7 quick questions. You ready?
Hmm. Yep.
What 6 words would you use to describe yourself?
So I'm going to use some E words because I started, obviously you shared that you do this.
Hmm.
So I kind of thought about this, and what first came up for me is empathy. And so I was like, well, every word I'm going to come up is going to be an E word.
I
So
love alliteration, so let's have it.
yeah, so I came up with empathy, entrepreneur,
Hmm.
equality,
Hmm.
envision,
Okay.
ethical,
Excellent.
empowerment.
Excellent.
There's another one I'm going to add there, which is easygoing. Kind of think I
Nice.
am, but
I love that it's all ease. That's awesome.
yeah.
I like that. Ease for easy. What is your favorite way to spend a day? Or one of them? I'm
Yeah, I
sure
mean,
you're a guy who has many.
I'll just share a quick story on that. Like when I started, kind of doing the work to take care of me, because I had, another thing, we didn't cover it, but I never thought that what I needed for myself personally was important. Like what
Oh
I
my
needed to give
God,
my kids
Adam.
and my wife and my job, like
Right.
that was more important, right? Um,
Well,
I
but
was
that
actually
comes
listening
from the trauma from your childhood. That
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. That's
So
yeah.
in my work, and I mean, it's still, I'm a work in progress, but
We
that
all are.
first kind of year after this revelation, I mean, there was a lot of difficult, I couldn't really figure out how to get my emotions in control. I just didn't know how
Mm.
to do it yet. I didn't know how to get the words out. I was a terrible communicator. And anyway, so I love this podcast by this lady named Jessa Reed,
Okay.
and she she was talking one day about how we're all like the way that we kind of move through the world is we all kind of like are like avatars, like in a video game where we can see our character running around, we can see our health meter, our battery level just going down, going down, going down. So she actually in this episode, she's like, I challenge everybody to sit down with your journal and write 5 things that recharge your battery. And so I took her up on that, and it was the most difficult thing. I couldn't do it. I was like, the hell do I like? I have no idea. And then it started to come to me. I like reading.
Hmm.
I like, I'm an extrovert, introvert. And so I kind of, what recharges me is when I can go maybe to the beach by myself with my
Hmm.
Kindle and read and maybe listen to a ball game and stuff like that. So, it's nothing too
It's not
crazy or whatever.
revelatory, but it's
Yeah,
yeah.
but a perfect day for me would be that, just getting some great time with my family, but also carving out a good chunk of time to take care of myself and what my mental health needs, which is journaling and reading and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Awesome. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Thank God for my grandparents. Both sets of my grandparents are the reason that having gone through all the trauma that I went through as a child, that I was able to actually be somewhat adjusted.
Hmm.
My grandparents were members of the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco. And by being a part of this yacht club, because they were all into boating, we got access to stay at this island in the middle of the Stockton Sacramento Delta system. This island called Tinsley Island, which was owned by the yacht club, and those experiences going there with my grandparents and my cousins and everybody, we'd go for like 2.5 weeks every summer.
Wow.
Phenomenal. I mean, I part of me is like, man, I want to elevate my financial situation so I could offer that to my kids. And I'm working towards that, but it's going to take time. But those memories at Tinsley Island were phenomenal.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you have that with
Mm-hmm.
your
Yeah, absolutely.
intergeneration and your family. It's very important. What is your favorite meal?
100% it's going to be Italian food.
Oh, me too.
I mean, we got, because, getting married in Italy, we were treated to the absolute best food that you can imagine possible. Far exceeds any, like you go to 5-star restaurant, Italian restaurant here in the States, it's not going to come close to what you get out
Oh, I'm
there.
sure
So,
not.
yeah. So, I mean, probably like a true classic Neapolitan margarita, I would say, is my number one
Mm,
go to.
lovely. What one piece of advice would you like to give your younger self?
Self nurture, positive self talk. Don't beat yourself up. You did the best you can. you made it work. I mean, here you got to age 50 almost and have it pretty good. So, don't beat yourself up over, challenges and difficulties.
What do you do? Do you have a strategy or a practice that when you catch yourself with negative self talk or you catch yourself beating yourself up about something, how do you refocus yourself?
Yeah, because it still happens quite a bit, and I
Every
mean,
day it
sometimes I
happens
don't
with
even
me.
I fail to even catch it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, mindfulness and breathing techniques, definitely are, those are two great tools to just slow down your nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
engage more of a parasympathetic response instead of like a reactive sympathetic response. And so, I'm not great at it. My wife in the other room probably be like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't do that. But at least I have the self-awareness to, to catch myself
Yeah,
in
that's the start.
moments where it's important to do so.
Yeah, lately I imagine my anxiety or the negative self talk when I say, mean shit about myself that I would never in a million years say to someone else. I imagine I'm not a sports person at all, so it's weird that this is the visualization, but I imagine it as a little ball and that I have like a little racquetball racket or a squash racket or something and I like whack it out, you
Yeah.
know? And it makes me feel good to that the violence of it being smacked away.
Yeah, I love
I
that.
like that. And then I've been doing 4-7-8 breathing. You breathe in for 4, hold it
Yep.
for 7, and exhale for 8. And I do a few rounds of that, a little tapping occasionally, but nothing really organized. And that helps.
Yeah, because that engages that ratio breathing is really good for engaging that parasympathetic response. It kind of just
Yeah,
for people that may not know what that is that are listening here, it's you could think of like your sympathetic part of your nervous system is like pushing on the gas, right? Just go, 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 go. And your parasympathetic nervous system is like, all right, let's slow things down. Let's push on the brake a little bit.
hmm
It gets you back to that place of feeling centered.
yeah, which is very hard for me, very hard for a lot of people.
Oh, it's I think it's always going to be in work in progress for everybody. I don't
Yeah,
think anybody's going to reach a state of just absolute, we've got it all figured out, we've got everything in control. And
no, definitely not. What is one thing you would most like to change about the world?
yeah, I mean it's the work I'm doing, which is, more empathy in the
Yes.
world. I mean, if you look at all the division that we've had and, the fighting and the name calling and the polarization, all we need is a little empathy to just try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And we don't necessarily need to agree with the other person, but it's like at least respecting that, okay, they're coming from a whole different set of life experiences. And so,
Exactly.
I get it. I get why you think a certain way, and that's okay. It's like, let's agree to disagree. I mean, but that empathy just to try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And, you know, it
Yep.
can be pretty difficult. There's a lot of polarizing topics and, it can be a difficult thing to do, but I think we're all human. We all share humanity.
Right.
So it's pretty easy when you kind of break it down to that.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree with you. Okay, so Adam, it's a Friday night. The kids are asleep. The wife's asleep. You're in front of the television. What are you watching?
So I'm trying to balance the binging these days to just prioritize my sleep, but I still do it. I just kind of went through that show Severance, which
Okay.
I think is really interesting and kind of touches on a lot of these topics that we talked about, which is, for I'm not giving stuff away, but I think the premise is, people going through a medical procedure so that when you go to work, when they go to this company, forget the name of the Lumen or something like that,
Okay.
they go to work, and when they arrive at work, they do not know, they don't have no memory of what their normal out of work self is. They're just in work, and vice versa. When they leave work and they get out of the elevator, they have no memory or knowledge of their work.
That's
And
weird.
so it's like, it's a
So it
really
literally
interesting,
severs them into two pieces.
yeah, it really is an interesting kind of like exploration of, companies, wanting to get the best and milk the most out of their employees. So, part of that is taking away their humanity and their personal
Oh
experience.
my God.
So it's really interesting. It's a good show. I think they only have one season, so I'm really curious to see where they're going to go with the next season.
Do you know what streaming service you watched it on? It's hard to tell.
Good
There's so
question.
many of them now. That's all
I
right.
can't
I'll
remember
look.
off the top of my head. I want to say HBO Max.
All right, I'll look. Wow. Yeah. I like shows that can make me think like that.
Oh, this one totally does. And it's, funny at times, weird at times, like crazy at times. So it covers a lot of different emotions and stuff.
Awesome. Well, this has been really great, Adam. I really appreciate you coming on to Permission to Heal and sharing your real, true, vulnerable, raw, amazing story and just being human with me for an hour. I liked this a lot. This was
Yeah,
great.
it's been great to get to know you and just, I feel like there's a lot of alignment with what we do,
We
but just the
have a
shared
lot.
experiences too
Yeah.
with, our kids having dealt with that,
Weird
whatever
yurder
it's called.
thing.
It starts with a V. That's all I
Yeah.
know.
I don't remember either. She's
Yeah.
21 now, so it's a while ago.
Yeah. Right.
I learned more about the urinary tract system of a human being than I care to know. So
Totally. Yep.
that it's gone. And at the end of November, I'm going to be a guest on. Well, I don't know when it will air, but the end of November, we're recording an interview for your podcast.
Well, I'm so excited for that. And that's
Me
going to be here
too.
before we know it. So looking
Yeah.
forward to that.
Yeah. Awesome. Have a good night.
Thanks. You as well.
Okay. Stick around.
Mhm.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Permission to Heal. I hope you found it moving and inspirational. Please remember, you don't need anyone else's permission to trust and follow your heart. You have the power within you. Subscribe to Permission to Heal so you don't miss any new episodes, and please share this with your friends.